Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this event for the Business for a Better World Center, George Mason University. I'm Maury Pyre. To see all of the people and the places that it has affected, I want to introduce and welcome our speaker today in our series, Andrew Byrnes. So Andrew, who has a background in law as an attorney and in operations and in entrepreneurship, actually has been 20 years at the middle of technology, innovation, law, business, and public policy. So if you sort of knit all that together, it's about how do you make things happen? And at the moment, he's Deputy General Counsel and Global Head of Public Affairs at Get Around. And Get Around, if you don't know it, is a leading global digital car sharing marketplace, which has been both a need and also a very fortuitous opportunity for lots of people to make a real difference, both in the world as well as for their own lives and budgets. He's a founder and lead adventurer of Adventures in Syncopation, which is something that I love, being a long-standing amateur musician. We were just talking about Broadway shows. But what this community does is to look at how can you supercharge successful entrepreneurship by giving people performing arts and music experience that really helps them in pretty much any field to become more wide-thinking, successful, inspired, energetic, etc. He previously served as Chief of Staff of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, with which many of you will be familiar, I certainly am, and the Principal General Counsel for Uber's global rideshare business. He has been a legal and operations executive at several venture-backed technology companies and a partner in several major law firms. And I won't hold it against him, but he went to Stanford and has a degree from Harvard Law. So I would like you to join me in welcoming Andrew Byrnes. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here at George Mason. And so when I prepared this presentation, I had the very narrow and insignificant task of talking about how one gets from great ideas to global impact. And I immediately thought, well, what is a great idea? How do you know that you've had an idea that's great? And I thought, well, ideas should be judged by their impact, by the problem they aim to solve, the challenge they hope to overcome, and how many people will benefit from it and how much. So I guess put another way, an idea without impact is like the proverbial tree falling in the forest with no one around to hear it. So I'm structuring this talk today. I'll first start by talking about how ideas are developed, and I'll use as examples 4 ideas that I've worked on and help operationalize. Then I'll discuss a framework about what needs to happen, how and by whom, to go from having that idea to the potential of having great impact. So of course, the first part of the process is to have the idea. And I talk about finding the idea because to me, there's this sort of popular notion that there's the bolt of lightning, there's the light bulb over the head, and sort of it all comes to you. It's sort of not, it's sort of realized instead of found. And so I think it's important to think about this to some extent as finding an idea. And there are 3 principles that I'd like to share with you today with regard to that. The first of which is be curious. So you need to open yourself to the possibility of having a great idea to either address a challenge or seize an opportunity. And there are a couple pieces in that sort of curiosity. One of which is, to be observant and listen. There's a challenge that many of us have, I myself included, that we sometimes are observant and we occasionally listen. You need to do more of those things. I need to do more, and we all should get on the path to a great idea. And then ask questions and listen to the answers. So it's an iterative, highly engaged process. Another component of curiosity is to broaden the circle in which you engage and the type of conversation you're having. You certainly can have a great idea by talking to the same people that you've always talked to about the same problems you have always discussed. But you're more likely to come up with that interesting and powerful new idea if you're engaging with new people, talking about new topics in new contexts. And one thing to keep in mind, and again, I juxtapose this with the notion of the lightning bolt from above, is that big ideas are rarely sort of presented in their full and complete form. Typically, they're presented as smaller ideas, and you're picking up pieces here and there and bringing them together. So if you're waiting for that big aha moment, you might be waiting a long time, and the world may pass you by during that wait. The second principle is somewhat related to what I just said, is looking at intersections. So intersections between disciplines, between industries, combining things together in ways that they haven't been combined before. I know we're here at the law school, and we think about in the patent world, most inventions are combinations of known elements as opposed to something that is completely without any precedent at all. And so it's important to be able to be open, knowledgeable about, and open to pull from different disciplines. My college classmate Udaya Patnaik calls this Reese's innovation. So Reese's peanut butter cups, of course, are chocolate and peanut butter, two great tastes that taste great together, and who can really deny that? And finally, and even more importantly than the first two, is to be passionate, both about achieving overcoming the challenge you're aiming to overcome, or leveraging the opportunity you're seeking to leverage, but also passion for the pursuit of the idea itself. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but it's tough. It's tough to come up with a great idea, and it's even tougher to get from that great idea to impact. And if you don't have passion to sort of do the work and affect that impact and change, it's going to be very difficult to sort of persist and have that diligence to accomplish your goal. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start by focusing on 4 ideas addressing 4 significant challenges or opportunities to sort of frame the rest of the conversation. So one challenge facing many families, and those of you who are parents in the audience will realize this, is that children are really busy. Were we ever that busy? I don't think we were ever that busy. There's school, there's after school, there's practices, rehearsals, games, performances, volunteer opportunities, and of course, play dates. And while there are more opportunities transportation-wise for adults than ever before, and I will talk about some of those, as you can imagine, given my background, many busy families find it difficult to get children where they need to go. And then they get their driver's license, then you worry about them getting where they want to go. But that's a topic of a different talk. Now, getting kids to school and activities safely was the idea behind Shuttle, which is a rideshare service for unaccompanied minors, where I was general counsel a number of years ago. And the idea behind Shuttle really was a combination of taking sort of the known world of ride sharing, adult-oriented ride sharing, and sort of applying it in a different way, in a way that was perceived as safer and more trustworthy than traditional rideshare. So in Shuttle, parents booked rides for their children days ahead and were assigned a particular driver, so you would know who was going to drive your child in advance. The drivers had the same certifications as child care workers in California, and the Shuttle team actively monitored each trip. So if there was an issue or an incident during the ride, the team could respond and take action. The second challenge that engendered what I think is a great idea is that millions of school-aged children have needs that can be addressed through special education and related services. And in fact, and appropriately, federal and state law has been built around providing children a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, whether or not they have so-called special needs. However, in many places in the country, there's just a severe shortage of qualified clinicians to provide these services. So the idea behind Presence Learning, where I led the legal and people team some years ago, is to use an online telehealth platform to connect children with special needs to clinicians who can provide those services. And so what the Presence Learning platform enables is you don't need to have the clinician in the room with the child. It's difficult to do, as I mentioned, because there's such a shortage. The clinicians are appropriately licensed to provide the services, but they don't need to be on site in person. Because of their technology platform, there are games and assessments and tools, sort of technology-based tools that can help amplify and make even more effective the session. And of course, schools are able to meet their legal obligations. So an idea responding to a particular challenge. The third idea, which I spend a lot of time focused on these days, is the car overpopulation problem. Now, you may not have thought about the problem in quite this scale before, but you probably know that as you're sitting here, your car is wherever your car is. And you probably know that your car, like most people's cars, is idle almost all the time. Statistics show that about 95% of the time, most cars are idle, which results in, as you can see on the slide, 30 billion daily unused car hours. So car owners, like ourselves, are paying a lot to have our cars just sit there most of the time. You might have a car loan, and there's certainly insurance and maintenance, all the while the car is depreciating. So the car is being less valuable as it's sitting there. And communities suffer as many cars occupy valuable real estate, parking lots and parking garages, and congest neighborhoods if you park on the street, for example. All the while, many people lack access to convenient and affordable transportation. So Get Around, where, as aforementioned, I'm Deputy General Counsel and Global Head of Public Affairs, was founded in 2009 around the idea of building a digital car sharing marketplace that makes sharing a car as easy as owning one. So Get Around's connected cloud technology allows users, using only their smartphones, to download the Get Around app, search for a car to use for only as long as they need. You need it for an hour, could be an hour, could be longer. Choose a car nearby, approach the car, unlock the car, again using just the phone, and drive away without paperwork, standing in line, or arranging to pick up a key. So for the person who needs the car, it's actually a great opportunity to have just the kind of car you need for just the amount of time you need it nearby. For the car owner, whose car, as we discussed, is likely to be idle, it's an opportunity to make some extra income by sharing your car. And because of the technology, you don't have to be there to hand over the keys to everybody that's using your car. The fourth and final idea I want to sort of start off with is one that the Dean mentioned around adventures in syncopation. And this really, although I had conceived of this notion of curiosity and intersection of disciplines and passion before I came up with the idea for Adventures in Syncopation, it was a great exemplar of sort of bringing those different factors and inspirations together. So Adventures in Syncopation is a community built around how experience in music and the performing arts supercharges successful entrepreneurship in any field. And so for me, this idea came to me as I was taking a walk near my home. Very few people in this audience know it. Many people who know me know that I am a runner, and I had run 5 miles and realized at the 5th mile that I was probably not up for running 10 miles that day, but you have to get back somehow. So I decided to walk and think, and this is what I thought. So I've spent my professional life working with innovators and entrepreneurs in a variety of capacities. At tech companies like the ones I've talked about so far, as a federal government official working on innovation, as a tech lawyer in Silicon Valley, and as an investor. And those experiences have always made me keenly interested in why people decide to become entrepreneurs and what makes someone a good entrepreneur. Before I knew how to spell entrepreneurship, I grew up as a performing artist. I took voice lessons, and I was in choirs and ensembles and shows. In fact, I had a voice lesson last weekend, and it went okay. After many decades, it goes okay. But I've long been familiar with the skills and mindsets that people experience and studies show come from music and performing arts experience. So for example, the connection between music and higher level thinking and brain development and math, or between performing arts experience and resilience and creativity and team building and discipline. And so the realization I had on this walk was, those skills and mindsets that come from music and performing arts experience, those are exactly the skills and mindsets that we think about as being important for entrepreneurship. And so over the ensuing year, I've been exploring these connections. So had many conversations with, actually hundreds of conversations with people with different vantage points from the entrepreneurship side, from the performance side. And one thing that struck me is that as intuitive as the ideas seemed to be and as powerful as it seemed to me and many of those to whom I speak, the connections are often underappreciated and undervalued, particularly if the entrepreneurship is outside of the arts. So when is the last time you saw an entrepreneur outside the arts either advertise that they had some performing arts experience, whether in their younger years or more recently? And certainly, when's the last time that you saw an investor say, you're a performing artist and you founded that health tech company, you're the one I want to back because of that background? My hope is to have those questions be much more frequently asked. So Adventures is really focused on 2 things. One is raising the visibility of this connection between performing arts and entrepreneurship. and those who exemplify it, these performer entrepreneurs, and then partnering through investment with select performer founders who have built innovative startups. So that's the fourth of the four ideas I'm going to talk about. But as I move now to sort of the model, the idea to impactful innovation model, which will guide the rest of the talk, put in that idea box the idea that you have been thinking about walking into today and ideas that you think about in the future, because I think the model is more generally applicable. So this is the framework. You can see there's arrows. I have helpful arrows here. So just to be clear which direction this goes. So on the one hand, it's very simple. You have an idea, magic happens, and there's impactful innovation, and there's a lot you can see in the world about that. And in some ways, the passion around the visibility of the innovators and the impact they have is fantastic, because I'm a champion of impactful innovation. I'm sure that many of you are here as well. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, though, there is this sense that it's either difficult to do. So we sort of lionize the people that have made true impact. And sometimes it can seem like that's something different. Like those are people that are in a particular place or circumstance and they've achieved something that I can't. So what I've tried to do here is sort of break down into these 5 pillars: legal clearance, intellectual property protection, market validation, user adoption, and operationalization, sort of peel back the layers of how you position your idea to have as great an impact as possible. The other point I'll make here, and the reason why I have this hub and spoke model, is it's not remotely linear. You sort of have to do all of these things in sequence and at once. And once you've gone through all of them, you have to go back and do them all again, because the world is dynamic, your idea is dynamic, and the operationalization of the idea will require you to sort of adjust over time. So we are at a law school. I am a lawyer. So by the power vested in me by the State Bar of California, I must start with this slide. So legal clearance. Of course, you need to start by evaluating the existing law, the world as it is. So you need to understand what the law is and its potential to impact what you are doing, and the risks and opportunities of the law today and what the law may be in the future. Because the last thing you want to do is have a great idea or idea you think is great and run immediately into sort of a legal barrier where there's a law on point and it prevents you from doing what you would like to do. Now, I will tell you that in the innovation space in which I've spent my career, sure, there are times the law is exactly on point, but it is more often that it is not, or it is unclear whether the law directly applies to you, or if it does, how it affects what you're doing. So that's why I use this graphic but it attempts to be a square peg in a round legal or regulatory hole. So if you're in that situation where the law says something and your innovation, your ideas is adjacent to it and it's not quite clear, you really have a choice to make. So one choice you could make is, my gosh, we're really risk averse. So if we'll just pass. It's just too close for comfort. And so the risk of not engaging in that market or producing that product is that other people are not going to view the risks the same way you do. They're going to be in the market ahead of you, and it will be difficult for you to enter if and when you decide to do so. Of course, on the other hand, if you're too hasty, then the people, whether it's regulators or courts that are looking at this potential intersection between your idea and the law, they may come down on the side of, you're not supposed to do it, or you're not supposed to do it that way, and that can be expensive and costly, and investors don't like to have to work with companies that have those sort of problems. So it's challenging. I will say what every lawyer would say when asked about anything related to the law is you should hire a lawyer to help you. There is the Innovation Law Clinic here at GMU, which I hear is gives a lot of value for your money. In fact, probably it's free. So you should talk to the Innovation Legal Clinic if you're in this area. And there are other resources. But one thing I also want to emphasize here is, of course, law is based on jurisdiction. So if you are today operating in Virginia, but want to operate nationally, want to operate globally, you've got to think about what the law is, not just here, but elsewhere where you intend to operate. More fundamentally, of course, you have to look at the existing law is to protect your model. Because ultimately, even if the law today isn't great or unclear, because this is such a great idea, we'll stipulate that it's a great idea, you need to fight or facilitate laws directed at your product, service, or business model. So there will be entrenched interests that will try to either prevent you from doing what you're doing altogether, or try to impose what I talk about as death by 1,000 regulatory or legal cuts. Might not say we want to ban what you're doing because that's impolitic to do, but we're going to make it really difficult. So, for example, in the car sharing space, the peer-to-peer car sharing space in which GetAround operates, traditional rental car companies tend to be sort of the entrenched interests that want to fight this new business model. There are many other analogies as well. Now, on occasion, lawmakers and regulators want to hasten the adoption and impact of what you're doing, and that's something that I'll talk about in a second. You want that, obviously. But to protect the model fully, you really need to develop a narrative, right? Like you need to say in a fairly concise and persuasive way why what you're doing is good for America, if you're American, good for Virginia, if you're dealing with Virginians. Like ultimately, notwithstanding the nuances of the technology and the business model, you really do need to answer the question of why is what you're doing good for your constituency. Another way I'd like to think about it is asking, how are you different, better, or both? And be honest in your answer and engage in good faith. So, of course, what you're doing is different and better in every case, right? We'll stipulate to that. At least you believe so. But if it's good for some groups and less for others, if it's focused in a way and solves only part of a problem, you don't need to take on, we have to be everything to everyone. In fact, that's very problematic from a business perspective. So think about that narrative, like we are helping, for example, like the shuttle, we'll talk more about shuttle later, we are about unaccompanied minors. Like we're not solving the world's problems outside of this particular area. And I think it's important to think about what you are doing and more importantly, what you're not, because understanding both is really important. Of course, you want to share the narrative once you've developed it, and be open to joining with others in terms of advocating for your business model. So, I've lived in sort of the legal and public policy places in many companies. You may have a situation, particularly in a larger organization, where there are certain people in the company or in the organization who are sort of they're focused on your business competitors. They're like, we are not going to be in a room with, we are not going to join with that company that we spend all of our time differentiating ourselves from and trying to beat in the marketplace. But in the context of law and public policy, it is most often better to join together and advocate interests to the extent that they overlap to some extent. You don't need to sort of agree with them on everything, but it's better to come in with 2 or 3 or 4 organizations or companies than one. So taking your seat at the table. So when I talk to my colleagues who are not lawyers or public policy professionals about the work that I do, I talk about law being the world as it is and public policy as the world as we want it to be. And if we want to achieve the world that we want it to be, we need to take a seat at the table. Now, when I came to the federal government in 2013, I had heard this phrase, you're either at the table or on the menu. And I thought, oh, that's a really cool phrase. It's been attributed and misattributed to many people over the years. And I thought it was completely metaphorical. But it turns out, and this is an actual conference room at the US Patent and Trademark Office, there's a table, and that's where you gather, and the decision makers are at the table. And you'll notice, and I didn't realize this before I came to government, behind the table, there's lots of seats. Those people are not at the table. They're not at the table as a matter of English, and they're not, quote, at the table as a matter of metaphor either. So the exciting thing, though, in terms of engaging as an innovator, as an ideator vis-a-vis the government is you can have a literal and metaphorical seat at the table, and it's absolutely essential that you do, because you need to be there as an advocate for not just the laws and policies that help your business, but the people that you're trying to help. Like, I think that's an important part that sometimes people miss. Like, you've had this idea because you're trying to solve a problem or leverage an opportunity. And so when you're there, I'm here for company X, yes, for sure, but you're also there for all the people that company X was created for and idea X was generated for. Now, the second of the 5 pillars is about intellectual property. And this is not entirely because intellectual property folks invited me to come here today, although they get pretty antsy if you put intellectual property after a second of 5. So I'm putting it as second. To save myself the grief, I'm putting it as second, but it's also really important. So today I'm going to focus, intellectual property has many facets. It's worth decades of study. For today, I'm going to give it a much shorter shrift and focus on patents and trademarks, which are 2 important parts of intellectual property. So in essence, particularly for those who are less steeped in intellectual property, often called IP, your idea, or at least how you're building your business around it, may result in an invention, which can be patented, and I'll dig into that. And then designs and names used to brand or promote the idea or the business may be trademarked. So for patents, a patent is a grant of a property right to the inventor by the government. And it's a bargain, essentially. It's an exchange. So you disclose your invention to the public in a patent that's published. And because of that, you get to exclude anyone from making, selling, or using the invention for a period of time, typically 20 years from when you file the patent, unless they have your permission. So that's hang on to that. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Now, not all ideas are patentable. For those in the intellectual property world, this is the subject of hundreds and thousands of pages of inquiry and analysis. And your invention must be novel, not obvious to one in the field. And there's, again, a lot behind that as well. But if you have an idea that you think is pretty new, or at least one that people are entirely novel, or something that would not have been obvious to someone at the time who came up with the idea, it's absolutely worth it to consider pursuing patent protection. Because patents can be very valuable. I mentioned earlier that people can't use your invention without permission. And you can get them to pay for the permission. And so licensing your ideas can be an important part of not just a startup, any company. Licensing can be important. There's been studies that have shown from a early stage company perspective, from a startup perspective, that patents can raise evaluation, can prompt investor interest. And the most clear popular culture example of this is Shark Tank. So in Shark Tank, the sharks almost always ask, do you have patent protection? And on behalf of a former official at the Patent and Trademark Office, I say thank you to Shark Tank for making patents cool again. But the reason why they ask the question is it's a barrier to competitors. So if you have a patent, that is a barrier to use of the invention by people that haven't paid you for it. Now, it's definitely true that there are certain industries where patents tend to be more important. Hardware, typically more important than software. Life sciences and biotech, typically more important than high tech. But it is really important. If only when you're asked the question, what's your patent strategy, you can say that we have considered it and we believe that trade secret would be an alternative in many cases, for example. But it's something you need to have considered because people will expect a serious innovator to have considered it. So again, I'm going to give another plug for the Innovation Law Clinic here at George Mason. Among the things that they provide is thoughts about an IP strategy. But working with a patent practitioner is important. Filing as soon as possible. First, we're in the US, we're a first to file system. I once went a couple years ago to a very prominent conference in Las Vegas, and I went around and was talking to some of the entrepreneurs who were there. And I always ask, it's my job, what is your intellectual property strategy? What's your patent strategy? And they say, oh, well, we're going to file the application once we get back from the show. I was like, okay, that's probably not a great idea because you've been among hundreds of thousands of people showing whatever this invention what purported to be. So file before you go to the big show is a little unsolicited, not attorney-client advice because I'm not your lawyer. And then more fundamentally, and this is more of a legal point, know and document your rights. So have written agreements with employees, partners, collaborators as early as possible. So there is sort of a romantic notion of we're all sitting in a garage someplace, or maybe we're sitting on a Zoom now and developing ideas. Better before the ideas have gotten out there and are really valuable to have the conversation among your collaborators as to who owns what and how. So just a couple quick points, actually GetAround related. So this is a drawing that GetAround's co-founder Sam Zaid developed some years ago. And I raise this here because it's important to map the patent strategy alongside your technological development and product roadmap. Right? Like, don't look at patents sort of in the abstract. Someone's going to ask us, so we should file an application for patent. But think about not just your development, but what's happening in the world. So as Sam and the founding team thought about, how do we, we have this vision to solve this car overpopulation problem. It's digital car sharing, so you don't have to hand over keys. We want to make it as easy as possible. What's happening in the world, or what will happen that we want to sort of leverage? So in the context of peer-to-peer car sharing, of course, the smartphone was, gaining prominence. You need the phone. If you don't have a smartphone, you don't have any device that will open up the car and help you proceed with the transaction. Connected cars. Right now, GetAround has the GetAround Connect device, which is installed aftermarket in cars that participate on the platform. At some point, very soon, we believe, most cars will come off the assembly line connected, an ability so you wouldn't have to have aftermarket hardware. And then, of course, ultimately, autonomous vehicles will come, and you want to be prepared for that from a technological and business perspective. This is the most recently issued GetAround patent about encrypted vehicle access control. Just to show that here, it's sort of the connection between the phone, the device installed in the car, and essentially the cloud. And so think about, from a patent perspective, where are we now, where do we want to go, and what can protect us, protect our business model and our technology as we move into the future. Trademarks. So you can have the most legally cleared idea in business imaginable, right? So it's legally cleared, you've got great patents, but you're not going to get very far, particularly in honestly, in a business consumer or business to business environment, unless customers can find your products and services. And trademarks show the source of goods and services, in particular classes. That's why classes of use. So sometimes you see the same company name in different industries, and that's okay, typically from a trademark perspective. But you really want to pick a mark that is as strong as possible. So you want to minimize the likelihood of confusion between the mark you use and the marks other people are using. And the Patent Office, if you seek a registered trademark, will help facilitate you doing that. But you don't want there to be confusion because you want people to associate your product or service with the mark. The best kind of marks are so-called fanciful, which means they have no meaning other than trademarks. So Pepsi is a great example. Pepsi had no meaning at all, and then they said, hey, this beverage is Pepsi, very strong trademark. You could have an arbitrary trademark. So it could be, so Apple Computer, now Apple Inc., is a great example of an arbitrary mark. So Apples are very well known in the world, but not from, at least pre-Apple, a computer, not in the context of computers. And the final type of mark, which can be more challenging to get a registration on, but also will itself be more suggestive of what you're trying to do, would be something like shuttle again. So shuttle is S-H-U-D-D-L-E. It's a play on shuttle with two T's. A suggestive mark would be like GetAround, for example. It connotes movement and transportation. And likewise with patents, the general IP rule is start doing whatever you're going to do as early as possible. So in the context of trademarks, start using the mark as quickly as you can, because use of a trademark is very important, and rights tend to accrue with use. And then federal registration. So for example, if you ever see a trademark and there's an R with a circle, that's a registered trademark. And there are a number of particular benefits that come from registration. You'll also see many famous marks that just have the TM, and that's sort of a sign, hey, this is a trademark, and it's not registered, but it is also really important to sort of lock in those strong rights. So I show this slide. These are the companies of the size that your company will be at soon enough, to be clear. But the Interbrand survey surveys world's most valuable brands. And all I would ask here is, what would you think, how would you engage with a product or service similar to those provided by these companies, but not marked? So a computer that didn't have the Apple mark, or no mark at all. A beverage that was a brown beverage, didn't say Coca-Cola. A burger that didn't have the golden arches of McDonald's. The chances are you wouldn't think about as seriously about using that product as you would. It's like, oh my God, oh yeah, it's an Apple computer. There's a whole set of expectations and affinities that come from at least from where I come from for Apple computers. But similarly with these other brands, not all of whom are based, in fact, almost the only one that's based in Apple and Google are based near my house. But regardless, it's definitely a complete accelerator and amplifier of the work that you do in terms of developing your idea. The third vertical is market validation. So, all right, we've got a legal and protected idea. Does anyone want this? I thought they did. When I came up with that idea, that was a really good idea. Let's check. And importantly, the reason why I have revisit demand is it's not a one and done. Like you always need to be, figuring out as the world changes, as your product or idea changes, how it's operationalized, is there a market for this? Now, you could have a great idea without a market, but I'm assuming that you want this to be something you can spend full time on and develop and build a business and build a sustainable organization, a model around. So understanding the demand is important. Assessing the model. So we talked about the business model. You really need to dig deep in terms of the relationship between the model and what you're finding out in the market. And then engaging prospects directly about and getting a more deep understanding of how they feel about the problem and the solution you're providing is particularly important. So to revisit demand, there's a couple of questions that I like to ask here. Does your product or service serve a need or a pain point? And this is different than the idea I had was to solve a problem, right? This is the next step of, okay, we've now actually pinpointed what we're going to do with this idea. And is it actually serving either the pain point we envisioned at the beginning or some other one that we've developed over time? Because you may find originally your trajectory is toward a particular idea, a particular solution, and over time you realize, we're good for that, but we should also consider, or in lieu of that, consider another problem to solve. How many people are affected? You may have a great idea that serves a real pain point for very few people. And if that's so, then you need to be aware of that early on. There may be a business there, but that's different from providing a service that someone needs every day. And just to be aware that, again, this can change over time. Market conditions change, competitors, societal changes. I thought of this the other day as I was clearing out some stuff in my home, and I have all of these cassette things that held cassettes. Right, I have the world's greatest complement of 1980s pop music cassette tapes, which are now worth very little, and similar, the containers to put them in are also worth very little. So anyway, in addition to the transition between cassette and CD and digital music, there are other changes that happen that may change the demand. One of the best examples of serving a need and unlocking pent-up demand in the last decade is rideshare. So I as was mentioned in the introduction, I was the lead general counsel for Uber's global rideshare business for a time a few years ago. And this is from Uber's S1, so they're filing to go public. And it's mind-boggling, the growth. So what this is showing you is that in the first 5 years, Uber went from 0 trips to 1 billion, first 5 years. The second billion trips took 7 months. The next 3 to get to the first 5 billion trips each took another 3 months. So the rate of growth, reflecting a tremendous amount of demand, was spectacular. When I joined Uber in 2018, there were 15 million rides a day in the rideshare business globally. Now, trips at Uber includes Uber Eats and other modes as well. But let's just say if this is the idea, if this is the product of your idea, kudos to you. That is absolutely impactful innovation on a global scale. But all right, so we have demand, at least at a point in time. let's assess the model because we actually want this, this to be a sustainable model. So will the market pay what it costs? Shuttle is a good example. I've mentioned a lot about Shuttle in part because it's the first company I joined out of the government after spending my career in law firms. And people loved the idea. Oh my gosh, I'm a parent, find me a way to get my kid to and from soccer. But parents weren't willing to pay enough. All that, monitoring of rides, live monitoring of rides, narrowing the scope, the number of drivers because they had to go through, a variety of hoops, appropriately so for the model. But Shuttle didn't survive as a company in part because there was not a sustainable business model there. So will the market pay what it costs and provide a reasonable return? What's required to scale? There are a number of ideas, rideshare actually being one, where it works a lot better at very large scale. Once you have, in any marketplace business, this is true, right? You need a lot of both supply and demand. During the period of time where you're growing and you don't quite have enough, typically you don't have enough supply. Supply tends to be the bigger problem. It's really difficult. So are you going to be able to get over that hump to scale? And then are there changes or enhancements that will serve our existing customers better or attract new customers? So back in the Uber context, what we now think of Uber is, most of us think of Uber as UberX. So that's more regular cars for rideshare. Uber started out as a black car ride-sharing service. But Uber Eats, once you have sort of the technology in place to connect drivers with things to be driven, Eats is sort of everything non-people related. Uber Pool, so providing a service that is at lower cost and leverages technology to be able to bring a number of people who are not going to the same destination together. Uber Freight. Uber Freight is a way to connect truck drivers with freight in a much more efficient way than was available in the traditional model. And Uber Bus. So that's an Uber bus in front of the pyramids in Egypt. I was pleased to have ridden on a bus. I did not drive it, mercifully, in the streets of Cairo. But that's how people get around in Cairo. And so Uber has a solution for them as well. I will mention actually back on the shuttles, this is my last shuttle comment. So Shuttle shut down because it cost too much to provide its services. Other players in the space have transitioned to a large extent to a we call B2B or business to business model where they do contracts with school districts who need to get kids to and from places, often are required by law to do so. So it turns out it's easier to be able to make those sort of business to business deals where you're guaranteed you're going to get a certain number of rides every day rather than being beholden to is the parent going to call today for the ride or not. So at those, particularly at smaller scale, you're better off having a larger client who's going to essentially there's guaranteed amount of business. And engaging prospects directly. Now this, at one level, seems obvious, right? So we need to evaluate demand. Let's talk to the people who are our customers, are our prospects. And you'll see here on the far left, that's from the Get Around app. It's traditional, traditional in the last few years. It's a star rating system. You get to provide immediate feedback about your trip, your booking. Of course, there are surveys and talking to customers, but there are also newer ways to engage. So in the middle here, this is a recent Indiegogo campaign by Dio Technologies, which is a company founded by one of our Adventures in Syncopation perfect pitch entrepreneurs. And Indiegogo sort of enlists the public to support your product and service, usually offering early access, but providing sort of a connection to have feedback from your sort of core users, the people, your early adopters. The second, and I think perhaps most fascinating of all, ArcTop is also a company founded by a perfect pitch performer entrepreneur, Dr. Dan Furman. It's essentially a brain-computer interface company. They've done deep research on neuroscience. And so what this Nuos product does, it allows essentially allows your app to read the brain of the user. So there's a headset, there's a calibration, and essentially they're able to determine from your brain activity whether you're enjoying your experience, your focus or not. So that is sort of next level, but it's certainly a lot truer a representation than a 5-star rating or filling out a survey. The fourth area is operationalization. Okay, so we have demand now. That's very exciting, but we actually have to get it done. So the first and most important part of this is building the right GSD team. For purposes of this conversation, let's just say GSD means get stuff done. And focusing on execution and then prioritizing efficiency and viability. Again, a great idea cannot achieve global impact unless it's sustainable and truly operationalized. So we're going to build the right team, and what I've done here is pulled out some characteristics that I think are really important for team members. Some of these I think will resonate very immediately, and others as you think more about it. So the first is emotionally intelligent. And emotional intelligence is important, one, because you're gonna have to work with this person, and if they're not emotionally intelligent, that's gonna be a challenge. But in terms of understanding the customer, understanding the other stakeholders for your idea and your product or service, you really want somebody who can engage in a way that's open and sort of willing to understand and engage with the ideas and the people that have them. Curiosity. This is a theme throughout the conversation. In part for the same reasons why it's important to be curious to have a great idea. You want team members that aren't just going to say, okay, that's great, I'll accept that. You want that provocation, that back and forth, although in an emotionally intelligent fashion, of course. You want diversity of perspectives. So do you have people on your team who have backgrounds or experiences or needs of your customers? Do you have both the customers you have today and the ones you want in the future? Synergy seeking. I rehearsed this presentation with my wife, and she said, well, why don't you just say collaborative? Isn't that the same thing? I said, well, you're clearly very smart. Actually, marrying me was the least smart thing she's ever done, but that's a topic definitely for a different presentation. But synergy seeking is much more proactive. So it's not just, I'll be collaborative if you come to me. It's like, let's proactively seek synergies between the ideas and perspectives that everybody on the team has. Resilience. So this is tough. There are risks at every step of the way. Most great ideas do not have global impact, and it's a difficult path there. And you really need team members that are resilient. And finally, confident. Not overconfident, to be sure, but confident and willing to engage, being able to represent ideas, not feel like even as a junior member of the team sort of has to stand back. You really want everybody engaged. And a broader point, which is here at the bottom, I really think it's important to have as many generalists in the room as possible. Now, some of us are generalists, where others are sort of specialists with a general orientation. And it's particularly important for leaders, particularly important in smaller companies where you don't have as many people, and so you really need to represent as many experiences and perspectives as you can in the room. But ultimately, even with a large team where there's lots of people with very specialized knowledge, you want them to be able to engage in all aspects of the conversation and bring to that table viewpoints and well-developed thoughts about those topics. Leadership. So of course you need a strong leader/leadership team. No leader is ideal for every organization and stage. If you've built a company, sometimes the people that build it from the ground are not the ones that are best positioned to carry it to that next level, and that's okay. Better to understand that at the beginning. Sometimes it's tough for those leaders who aren't quite ready for that next step, but important to recognize for the viability of getting the idea to have impact. This is a bit of a hierarchy in my mind. From direct leadership is, I told you to do it, so do it. Demonstrate is, I'm doing it now, this is how you should do it, as sort of modeling. Enabling is, okay, go ahead and do it. Doesn't have to be, go ahead and do it. Empowering is giving the tools and some clearance, depending on the organization. Sometimes you have to say, all right, Joan is taking, I'm empowering Joan to do this. Yes, other stakeholders, she can consult you, and she should, but ultimately Joan is going to lead on this. And inspire. There's a lot of focus, I would say, on inspiration, and inspiration is great. And that's something that leaders need to be able to do. But these are sort of how I think about sort of those different types of leadership qualities. And a leader needs to be able to bring all of them. So as you're considering either your own capacity as a leader or others, think about how do I do these, or how does the other person do these, and where's there room for improvement? I just put this slide up because I think it's kind of funny. I will just tell you that one of these slides is the team that I went to trial with, a high-profile trial. One of them is from the federal government, and one of them is from a technology company based in the Bay Area. I will leave you to decide which is which, but all very high-performing teams, some more informal than others. Others not requiring suits, by the way, which is an aspect of Silicon Valley life. Focusing on execution, ideas alone are not good enough. I think that the point I'll make about execution is it's really easy to make the perfect the enemy of the good. So you have an idea, you have a vision of the way things should be, how it's going to play out, but we're not quite there yet. Let's just wait and kind of, there can be a resistance to move forward and take action unless there's sort of a confidence that the product is completely finished. It's perfect. Everybody's going to love it. Like if you wait that long, it's kind of a theme of this presentation to some extent. If you wait that long, it doesn't matter because the world's going to have passed you by. So think about, have a bias to action and be confident in the GSD team that you built and the work you did for market validation, legal clearance, and so forth. If you put those building blocks in place, you don't need to make the perfect the enemy of the good. You can be biased to action, and that's most likely the best risk minimizing approach, because if you don't take the opportunity, as I mentioned, things may pass you by. Prioritizing efficiency and viability. Again, you have to have a sustainable business, a sustainable organization to achieve impact. You need to, at some point, spend no more money than you're making. And I realize I say this as a Silicon Valley-based tech person. So you may need additional investment, which is fine as well. But you eventually want to get toward a profitable place where the business will be able to, you and the business will be able to run without seeking outside, without having to seek as much outside investment and engagement over time. And finally, user adoption. All right, so the market is there, we've operationalized, and now we've got to talk to the world, not just our customers of today, but the world about what we're doing. So it needs to be widespread visibility in our target markets. We need to have a compelling narrative, which we talked about a bit before in the context of protecting the business model, and third-party validation, because nothing gives someone comfort to use your product or service than knowing that someone that they know or someone that they respect is already doing so. So widespread visibility, again, people need to know about your product to use it. I highlight here some examples of tools in the visibility toolkit. These are more media and public relations and marketing centric. Earned media. So this is an article in the Honolulu newspaper about Get-Around's arrival in Hawaii recently. So so-called earned media. These are reporters doing articles about your business and your leaders, ideally. Of course, you could do paid media or advertising. And then particularly recently, and in the last several decades, owned and social media. So these are a Facebook post and a tweet about certain aspects of Get-Around's sustainability push, including our commitment to be entirely electric vehicles on the platform by 2040. So think about, again, as you want to become visible, what are these tools that you can use? Some of them are more costly than others. Some of them are more appropriate for certain audiences than others. But certainly make sure you have those sort of on your, on the top of your mind. And spending your time as an innovator identifying what are the places, whether it's blogs, other websites, like who is talking about ideas like this, both because you want to learn about what's happening in the market and improve your own thinking, but also when you have things to say about your business, about your idea, those are places that are more likely to pay attention. And a compelling narrative. So you need to, similar to the context, as I mentioned before, in terms of engaging policymakers, you want a compelling externally facing narrative as well. And they should synergize because policymakers actually are real people and look at other stuff besides the narrative you're delivering in the public policy context. So there's a few top line points here. Here's some examples of some narratives. Generally speaking, the more prominent your company is, the shorter your narrative can be. Because you don't have to say as much, because people bring to, they have things in their mind about your message already. But presence learning, so leading the way in teletherapy, helping students thrive everywhere. So there's a sort of a forward-thinking leadership component. We're helping students thrive. So this is not merely getting by. This is not just checking a legal box for schools. They're thriving, and they can do it everywhere, which is the premise behind teletherapy. For Get Around, we're connecting safe, convenient, and affordable cars with people who need them to live and work. There's the connected component. It's technology-centric. This is opportunities for people who need to live and work. So this isn't when you're on a vacation, you can certainly use Get Around, and I appreciate it if you would, when you're on vacation, but this is I need to do something today, and this is a service that can help me in my daily life and work. Uber has changed its as many companies do, its tagline over the years, but it's about reimagining it for the better. It's sort of, what Uber is, but this is sort of a aspirational message that sort of is an important narrative as Uber sort of positions itself as a global leader in mobility. And finally, just do it. So Nike, just do it is probably the greatest tagline of all time, because you know what it means. All of us know what it means, but it means something different to all of us. So for me, it might mean running, and I will say I did not run this morning, tomorrow for sure. But I know what Nike means, and when I put on my Nike shoes to run, that's what it means to me. But getting to the point of that narrative, that level of empowerment and facilitation of what I want to do. Finally, third-party validation. So as I mentioned before, it's really helpful for potential customers to know that someone they know or respect approves of what you're doing, has used your product. So that's why people focus on Yelp reviews or other reviews, because those are people like me that have gone to the restaurant or have used the service before. But you can also use formal partnerships depending on the nature of your idea as a validator. So for example, for Get Around, we have corporate partners. Uber is one of them. So we have a partnership with Uber. So Uber drivers who need a car to be an Uber driver, we have a relationship where they can book a car on Get Around that's already pre-approved by Uber. So it makes it very easy for them to earn money by driving. But we also have municipal partners, because many cities around the world see the environmental and sustainability benefits of car sharing. Studies show that one car shared takes about 10 off the road. So having a car share spot at a transit station or in other central corridors of cities enables the people that live nearby to, why do I need to own a car that's going to, again, sit there 95% of the time anyway? If there's a car outside my door that I can book for several hours whenever I need it, every few days or every week or more, then that is a better option for many people. So in talking about Get Around, as I'm doing right now, one of the ways that I help validate the idea in the company, and you can do it analogously with regard to your idea and company, is to say, oh, we have these partnerships, and even people aren't familiar with the idea of car sharing or with Get Around as a company, like, oh, well, if Los Angeles and San Francisco and Paris think that this is a value to their cities, I should take I should look more carefully. So the path from finding a great idea to making a global impact is rarely direct, almost never easy, I want to be clear, but I'm hopeful that the idea to impactful innovation framework that I've outlined today will help you and your GSD team along the way. So whether it's solving a problem of car overpopulation like we're doing at Get Around, building a community of performer entrepreneurs and their champions like Adventures in Syncopation, the idea you're working on now, maybe even as you're listening to me talk, or the one you're going to have in the shower tomorrow morning, finding an idea, bringing it to fruition, and making the impact you set out to make is an important and fulfilling pursuit, and I wish you all the best in yours. So I want to thank the Business for a Better World Center, the Center for IP and Innovation Policy, both here at George Mason University for hosting me, And for all of you in person here in Arlington and online for listening, I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
So if anyone has a question in the audience, you're welcome to pop up here and ask it through the mic so our virtual audience can hear it. Or I'm happy to ask some that were passed along in advance virtually as well. Well, then
I'll start with one of the yes.
Sure. All right. In your experience, how do or should entities address ownership arrangements, equity, voting, financial interests, between those who bring financial resources and those who bring intellectual property into a new entity?
That is a great question. I think it depends. It's very dependent on the nature of the business and the collaborators. If you have and sort of the balance, sort of the considerations in terms of getting from idea to impact, and valuing the relative importance. So if you have the great idea but no wherewithal to put it together, in that case, in terms of ownership and upside will be heavily more on the folks that bring money to the table. If you have an idea that can become profitable very quickly or sustainable very quickly, it's more likely that will be reversed. But I think it's really important to think about those questions as early as possible. And when you do, think about what the next rounds are going to be. So there are businesses where to achieve sort of the level of scale to get started, you need, and this is often the case, right? You need a certain initial tranche of funding or else you're just going to be doing it on the side. But over time to scale, you need more support. So I think it's important to understand sort of what the dynamic is today and what it's likely to be in the future. And that is something where from an innovator intellectual property holder's perspective, counsel is going to be really important to help navigate that for them.
Thank you. I'll just keep going. Several special interest groups that are gaining power are advocating for patent waivers for drugs and even the abolishment of the patent system. In particular, the Initiative for Medicines, Access, and Knowledge, IMAC. What is your stance on patent waivers in anti-competitive groups that try to invalidate patents?
I mean, I don't have a formal stance. Certainly Get Around doesn't have a stance on those issues specifically. I'll say that the patent system is one in which balance is inherent. Balanced patent system is most important. So, I would certainly oppose any attempt to abolish the patent system writ large. But I think, like any creation of law and policy, there needs to be an iterative conversation about both the fundamentals of intellectual property in this case, and also the circumstances in which we find ourselves. I think there is a risk of taking too hasty action to solve today's problem. And it's important to think about these systems over the long term. Not that the patent system is perfect by any stretch, but I'm generally wary of approaches, not specific to this particular example, but I'm generally wary of approaches where we take near-term dramatic steps that may not serve us in the longer term, serve the interests of innovation and the public interest in the longer term.
Thank you. All right, please.
Hi, I am Andre. I am a PhD student at UDC, and I'm Master in Sustainable Development. So I like to understand what are the thoughts of people in other areas about sustainable development in general. This is my my field. So when we think about like this global world that we are talking about, global impact, and think about diversion and equity and environmental issues and social like issues, where can the model, of course, like in the legal part, we will consider all of the legislation related to these elements, but where like practical actions in the model should we consider like sustainable development and equity and diversity elements in the model? So this is what I would like to hear from you.
Sure, sure.
Thank you.
So I think from the perspective of sort of sustainable development, ultimately the consideration, so whether one is regardless of the area of industry of the idea itself and the impact, right? It's important that as you think about the narrative, the engagement with stakeholders, which would include champions of sustainable development and otherwise, that this part of the process. So if you come up with an idea, for example, and from a narrative perspective, although you aspire to facilitate sustainable development, if you're finding a disconnect between your efforts and sustainable development, I think it's important through the model to think about, okay, what's the narrative? What's the narrative? How are we operationalizing? Because you can operationalize in a variety of different ways. And ultimately, I think it's up to you as the ideator, initially with other stakeholders, to sort of frame both what the product or service will do and how you talk about it in a way that is compelling to those who will experience the effects of the product, and also those people who will need to fund the efforts. So although I've focused here just because of my background on for-profit, technology companies, essentially, all of whom I believe have missions and ideas around solving significant social problems or leveraging opportunities, I think it's important to sort of bring in the stakeholders that you need to bring along the way, particularly in the protecting the model section, being at the table. And also ensure that as you are sort of calibrating the market demand, the user adoption, you're doing so in a way that has the impact you started out trying to achieve, including vis-a-vis sustainable development. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think this will be our last one.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. It was wonderful. I want to ask you what you think the policymakers and public servants should or can do to promote an ecosystem where new ideas are becoming more global. And I'm talking more at the local state level and also at the federal level.
Yeah, so I think if we go back to the first section about finding the idea, I think facilitating opportunities for curiosity, for sort of these conversations with different types of people about different topics. So I think a strong education system from kindergarten on is absolutely essential. You want to have people that are curious enough and capable enough to have these conversations, and in a place where they can bring diverse perspectives together. So I think that's hugely important. Without a sound educational system, it's very difficult to do anything that I've just described. I think that there's a lot of room for government, or the federal government, Patent Office, and many other agencies. There are everything from sort of hackathons to other economic development activities and initiatives that sort of support people getting together to come up with ideas. And I think that is the more active and engaged that people can be facilitated by the government, the better. And then finally, putting budgets on the table for research and development, to support small businesses and the ideas that I've just described. Because this is tough. I mean, there's a model and there's impact. It may seem easy. It's not that easy. It's not even remotely that easy. So facilitating the journey of the ideator along the way from let's have children be able to make them as engaged and able to ideate and work with others. All the way through to supporting people that have ideas and want to make an impact. I think that's absolutely critical for government and the private sector as well. Awesome. All right, is that it? I did that the last question. It's the last question. Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. So I'm Sean O'Connor, Faculty Director of the Center for Intellectual Property by Innovation Policy. We want to thank our partners, Lisa Gremmel and the Business for a Better World. This has been a joint presentation by Scalia Law School and Business School at George Mason University. Now, we do have a nice reception out front that will be available till 4:30. I'd like to encourage you all to go out there and spend some time networking, getting to know each other. And Andrew, I think you'll stay around for a little bit for some of that. But again, let's thank Andrew for coming in. He has such a widespread, deep experience in all these areas, and we hope that we will keep in touch for many years to come. Thanks, Andrew, once again.